Lastly, I would like to invite the final speaker, Mr. Ki-tack, professor from the Korea Academy of Marine Science. He is also the president of KAMS, to talk about the topic of development of marine infrastructure industry to secure key marine manpower. Professor Lee is the first president of the KAMS, and in 2019 he was honored as a distinguished member of the American Geophysical Union, a very large institution. He is currently a professor of Pohang University of Science and Technology. Please welcome President Lee.
반갑습니다.
Good morning. My presentation, compared to those of Ms. Lee and Mr. So, I think is on the same page, and it's a great segue into my presentation. So in terms of science or industry, for us to develop good talents must come to the ocean science sector. Then what do we do to attract bright minds? I would like to spend the next 15 minutes to think of how we can do this. In 2010, since 2010, very rapidly, the Department of Medicine and all universities have become very popular, and that is a trend here to stay and get deeper and deeper, for a simple reason. Once you graduate from School of Medicine, economic compensation will be very huge. That's why students and their parents prefer to follow that path. I don't think that anyone can judge them, because this is the reality. So applying the same logic to ocean science and technology, for bright minds to come to this sector, we need to provide a very attractive industry and form a market. So that's the main message of my presentation. Looking around us, we see other people and we see different industries: ammonia, fertilizers, cements, steel, and plastics. All of these are easily found in our daily lives. In the 20th century, the human civilization really were determined by these four elements. Ammonia fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers were made back in 2010 when the Haber-Bosch process was developed, with high temperature and 200 pascals of pressure, and at 400 to 500 degrees of temperature, if you mix hydrogen and nitrogen, you can get ammonia. And you use ammonia for a green revolution, and per unit, grain productivity was exponentially raised. There are about 8 billion people living on Earth, and this fertilizer was a key contributor to making that happen. And in the 60s, Korea underwent urbanization, and cement. Most of our buildings are made of cement. At 900 degrees, the limestone is burned to make cement. So a lot of heat is required to make cement. And in buildings, there are a lot of steel that is used. Since the steel age, about 2,000 years, we have been relying on steel. And in the future, this steel market is very promising. Steel is quite affordable. We don't know how much longer we will be relying on steel, but for a long period of time, definitely. And plastics. Since the 1950s, plastics have been in use massively. Most plastics come from petroleum. Some are biodegradable, but the amount of plastics, biodegradable plastics used is quite small. All four of these materials require fossil fuels. Because nitrogen, to reach that high level of pressure and temperature, we need to burn fossil fuels to get to that. And same is for cement, plastics, because they all come from petroleum and fossil fuel-based sources. So since the Industrial Revolution in 1850, based on these fossil fuels, the humanity developed our civilization. But then we came to a challenge because the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up, and global warming has become a very serious problem. So whether the environmental challenges are true and substantive or whether we are at a very abnormal level, we need to look to the past, what the environment was like compared to the environment today. So scientists in the past 40, 50 years have conducted a lot of research. If you look at the left-hand side, this is the temperature of the atmosphere over the past 800,000 years. We look at the data dating to the Industrial Revolution, the changes in the atmospheric temperature, the concentration of CO2, and the changes in the sea level. And all the record was observed through a direct observation. There are changes, but there's no clear pattern or direction. In the past 80 years, there's no evidence of a rise or fall in CO2 ppm. It just fluctuates in a very fixed band. And same is true for atmospheric temperature, about 12 to 26 degrees Celsius, and then the sea level remained consistent. CO2 concentration in the atmosphere remaining consistent means that the cycle of this fluctuation is because of the ice age and then the melting age. During the ice age, the CO2 ppm would fall from the 280 ppm during the warm ages. So here in this room, it's been about an hour into this meeting, and I think about 500 to 600 ppm of CO2 will be observed in this room right now. 500 ppm means if there are 100 air particles, about 400 to 500 of that would be CO2. It's a very small amount, but the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere determines the temperature of the atmosphere. So this consistency means that the planet has remained constant in terms of CO2 concentration and the temperature. On the right-hand side, to maintain this constant level of CO2, there are plants on land and then the ocean. So there is exchange between the CO2 in the atmosphere and with the CO2 on land and in the ocean. There is active exchange, but through the exchange, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere rises and falls. And there, in the past 800,000 years, no rise or fall in the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has happened. So meaning that the Earth has maintained very consistent levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there's a very strong scientific evidence supporting this. Of course, CO2 levels do not remain constant, but it maintains a good balance. If we were to project a large amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then that will break the balance. And this is exactly what has happened since the Industrial Revolution. So since the Industrial Revolution, as you have seen many times before, the consistency has been breaking. On the left, on the right-hand side, you can see the consistent level of consistent rise in sea level. When the temperature rises, the water would expand and the volume of water will grow. 50 to 60% of that 50 to 60% of sea level rise is made because of the rise in the world, then the ocean temperature will also rise. Compared to pre-industrial levels, CO2 level has grown by about 50%. The CO2 concentration in the atmosphere right now, compared to the 1,000 years or a million years before, is unprecedentedly high. So please be mindful of this fact. So very simply, before the Industrial Revolution, for about 800,000 years, the Earth has maintained constant. However, since the Industrial Revolution up to the present and going forward for a while, this constant will continue to be broken by all the industrial activities by humanity. That is where we're headed. And this is supported by a very clear scientific evidence. Then I would like to make a rather bold statement. The fossil fuel-based civilization should be abandoned. Of course, farewell in the human society would be quite simple, but bidding farewell to the fossil fuel-based civilization will not be so simple because all the plastics that we are using, the steel, cement, all of those materials are such a big part of our lives that it is not easy to bid goodbye to fossil fuels. Nevertheless, how should the ocean and science sector respond? As Dr. Seo has mentioned before, this comes from Vice President of Post-Tech and a professor of chemical engineering, Mr. Jung Gi-yeol. Around Korea, there is a large amount of biomass, in particular seaweed forests that are artificially cultivated. So there are large volumes of seaweeds around Korea, and we can tap into this by applying a chemical process to make something that can replace fossil fuels. We can create new materials and new fuel so that we can replace some part of the fossil fuel in our civilization, and then we can develop the ocean science sector. And secondly, ocean is a large source of CO2. The T here means trillions, so a total of 140 trillion tons of CO2 is stored in the ocean. Since the Industrial Revolution, for the past 250 years, human beings generated about 1.5 trillion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. If we were to capture all of that successfully and put them into the ocean, about less than 1% of the CO2 levels in the deep ocean will rise. So that is to say that the deep ocean is a very stable storage site for CO2. We can use the ocean to store CO2, and developing such technology is where the ocean community should endeavor, so that new industry based on the biomass and the 2050 carbon neutrality target for the world can be achieved. And so, in conclusion, we need to create this ocean-based industries that is very attractive to the general public, and in order to attract the brightest minds from other sectors into the ocean science sector to help address various ocean challenges and to create new industries. So we will have a great condition to make this all possible. So it was a short presentation, but with all of you, I think it was a good opportunity for us to think about how to attract good talents into ocean science and technology. And I am grateful for this opportunity, and thank you very much for listening.
네, 열정적인 발표 감사합니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. So we have gone through all 4 presentations, and now we will take a 5-minute break before we start the panel discussions at 11:15. We will prepare the stage for the next 5 minutes, and I will see you back here at 11:15.